Hi, today I am here with REVELL Horsey. REVELL is a wonderful business leader. He was the founding president of Hello Wallet, which has been acquired by Morningstar. No big deal here. He also held numerous leadership positions at really large companies. And he is an advisor and a board member to startups. And I've had the opportunity to work with him when he was on the board of a startup I've worked at in the past. And so it is an absolute pleasure to have him join us today. Revel, thank you so much for being with us today.
Happy to be here, Carolyn. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Same here. So today, my question for you, and thank you for taking the time to help us kind of take this problem apart, is that I've read a lot about how, marketing positions have a high turnover, especially at the C-level positions. And I was curious to have your thoughts, with your experience working with different size companies, what can cause these positions to have a higher turnover than other C-level positions in the organization?
Okay, sure. I respect the fact that this needs to be brief because we all suffer from ADD. So I will try and provide you with a succinct and hopefully cogent response. Carolyn, my experience with startups has been that for sure the marketing leadership is subject to a lot of turnover, and I think the reason for this is because there oftentimes is a lot of ambiguity and confusion about what is the role of marketing in a young organization that is scaling. The first mistake that can be made is to hire a marketing leader too early or too soon in the development of the company, and that is an understandable mistake because the founder, the CEO, is really anxious and eager to get product to market. And feels that in order to do that, you have to have somebody who brings lots of marketing chops, and that person arrives on the scene and may well discover that in fact the product really isn't ready for prime time yet, and that it's sort of a premature launch. And yet, as a professional marketer, your job is to build these campaigns, but the product isn't really ready for those campaigns. So that is one of the challenges. But I want to leave that one aside because there's really nothing that a market leader or marketing leader can do to avoid that pitfall, other than to do really good due diligence before you sign on to join the company, just to make sure that is the company really ready for a serious marketing effort. Leaving that aside, and interrupt me if I'm not making sense or you have any follow-up questions, but leaving that scenario aside, I think that the other pitfall that marketing leadership often has with in a small or a scaling company is that the leadership team doesn't really understand the role of marketing and the value that marketing brings to the organization, and part of the reason for that is because there isn't sufficient what I'll call education, internal education, or communication between the marketing leadership and the sort of key stakeholders who I always think of these key stakeholders, whether you're, head of sales or head of product or the CEO, or, head of customer success as your clients or your customers. And my job, as if I'm the head of marketing, is I obviously want to make sure, I want to help these people succeed. Where you can get yourself into trouble, though, is if your key, if your important clients, if your internal clients or stakeholders don't really understand what are reasonable expectations from a marketing effort or from the marketing team, then what can happen is you get misalignment, right? Because these key stakeholders, their expectations are not not realistic. And oftentimes what will happen is there'll be an absence of clarity around sort of quantifiable KPIs, or maybe more simply, how do you define success? And in the absence of having some clarity or some sort of a report card, you can create a lot of confusion, right? Because people sort of look at each other and they say, well, like, it doesn't feel like we're getting as much bang for our buck as I think we should have gotten. And you have to sort of reset expectations and say, well, wait a minute, here are the reasonable expectations you can get based upon the audience, based upon the spend, based upon the whatever it is. But all of this requires a lot of communication and education. And I think where small companies tend to break down is, and it's sort of ironic because by definition, if it's small, then you should be easy for there to be great communication. The problem is that when you're in a startup world, everything's moving so quickly that it's sort of head down, running as fast as you can, and the risk is that you don't take the time to have the conversations and set the expectations and make sure that everybody sort of is on the same page. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you said something about establishing KPIs and understanding what can be measured and how it should be measured. And I think, in my experience, it's really interesting. We tend to think that everything is measurable at this point, right? And first of all, it's not. Like, it takes a lot of background work to put all these pieces together and to have your entire marketing funnel be measurable. So that's one thing, right? It's like, whenever you invest in your marketing, you should have this conversation about, is this measurable, and are we okay with the fuzziness that is around us before you invest into it, right? Because sometimes we do need to invest in things that we can't measure, but I think it's important to have the conversation first.
Yeah, well, and that also, I think, leads to another consideration, which is, a startup company is in a place or in a stage of development where there's such a focus on just transactions, like sell, to validate your product and the value proposition, and yet marketing is, I think, done properly, is less about transactions, and it's more about establishing authenticity and voice in the marketplace. And that's to your point, I mean, that's fuzzy, right? That's fuzzy. It's also longer term, right? It's not like you overnight establish authenticity. And so the risk is that it's sort of in the perpetual fire drill mode of let's just putting out all the fires. You're so focused on what's right in front of you and not sufficiently focused on looking through the windshield down the road a little bit. And yet that's where real marketing happens, right? It's thinking about how to establish a brand, an identity, a voice, and that's a craft, right? That's a very careful orchestration that it requires, I'm going to say requires patience, and patience is not something that is a comfortable bedfellow with many startup cultures.
Right, right, exactly. Okay, so
What else can I tell you?
well, but I guess, what we should all take away from this is that good communication is really key, so that we're not spending our time on the wrong things and everybody has the same expectation from the marketing team. And that would be a good basis to step into a marketing leadership role, wherever, really, small or large companies.
Yeah, and I think related to that is make sure as a marketing leader that you're being hired for the right reasons,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the risk is that the CEO is hiring you as a marketing leader to solve a problem, which is really not a marketing problem, right? For instance, product market fit, right?
Mm-hmm.
The CEO may think that the product is right for the market, and it's just a matter of turning on the marketing volume to, so that the dogs eat the dog food.
Mm-hmm.
But too often, it's not a marketing challenge. It's not a marketing issue. It's that the product actually hasn't yet been adequately tested for the audience, right? And so really important as a marketing leader to know that you are being asked to fix a problem that is a marketing problem, and that you have the right assets and skills for for that job.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, well, Revel, thank you so much for your time. I think this was fantastic advice and a lot of food for thought for all of us. So thank you
Happy to do it.
today.
Thank you. All right,
Yeah.
Carol.
All
See you
right.
soon.
Bye.
Bye.